This was the volume 2 that I just spoke about, and the living system is now going to be available. Like I said, this week you'll have a chance. Okay, we also have in volume 2 on the inside cover are a bunch of fundamental questions, just like volume 1 if you've seen it. And right after the question, you get to see the page number that you can go and find the answers to. So this is a fun way to get right into it when you first get the book. And instead of taking time to actually read the whole book, which is definitely going to take you a couple months, some people a couple of years, because each volume is several hundreds of pages long, you do want to take a chance to look at the pictures, and under each one will have a description. And that's a real quick way to go through the book, is just look at the images, and the description underneath it is a summary of that page or those couple pages and concepts we're talking about. So that's a quick, little, easy way to go through. First thing I wanted to talk tonight, though, about is something that's happening just recently. Most of us probably aware of Irma. That's how they say it. She made landfall just the other day, and luckily there wasn't a lot of people that were hurt. There was some, but this was the largest recorded hurricane and the fastest 185 miles an hour one that I think that they've documented. So this was a real important hurricane, and the amazing thing is modern science still doesn't have the origin for these hurricanes. How do they form? And so I'm going to talk a little about that today. Matter of fact, right now. When you read the weather model, which is in volume 1, the last chapter, chapter 9, we have several important discoveries in there. These discoveries all come back to something scientists know. If you can see here, the scientists say the importance of atmospheric pressure to the Earth's weather cannot be overemphasized. This is the part they do understand. They understand these little H's up here on a map. This is a weather map. Those are the highs and the L's are the lows. They understand that the H's are the ones that control the weather. H's just appear out of nowhere. Why all of a sudden is there a high pressure in that spot? That's the question that's never been answered until you read the book. And in the book we find out that high pressure is created by something we call a hypotherm. Okay? A hypotherm forms underneath the ground when the water turns to steam. Russ explained a little bit earlier, 1 gallon goes to 1,700 gallons. So this is a tremendous increase of pressure. And right now, every day around us, this is happening, and we don't see the water vapor coming up. It's something we can't see. But in your enclosed area, like when you take a shower, you can see the hot vapor getting on your windows, on your mirrors, or in the windows, and you can see it in that enclosed environment. Well, when the clouds are forming, what happens is the pressure and the temperature the pressure has been reduced, and then when the temperature is reduced, there's condensation, and they condense, and they turn into a cloud. So as you can see here, this is the Journal of Geodynamics. They find out immediately after earthquakes that there's clouds, and in the first volume we have several examples of that. The reason this is important is because the old water cycle, as you see here, is all based on one heat source. Up here on the right-hand side, you can see that. It's the sun. That's all they have. Well, it turns out there's something else. And it's important because what you're seeing here is heated water. This is where Irma came from. Okay? Scientists do know that water only has to increase 1 degree over a large area, and you have this evaporation that's very different than over here in colder areas. So what happens is all this water, new water, now is coming up in the air, and when we have very specific highs and lows in different areas that are creating wind. When you have high, it's pushing everything out away from it. When it's cold, a low pressure, everything's getting condensed and it's coming in. And we show this in the book through balloons, when you increase a balloon and you lower a balloon. So this is critical for what happened with Irma, because the open surface temperature, we asked an important question. Clouds have not been shown to be the cause of the cooling, as the world sea surface temperature map below illustrates. The sun shines equally along the equator, heating the ocean surface evenly. Therefore, there must be another source, that's the key, for heating and cooling of these anomalous regions in the ocean. So we have a couple pictures here. I think I have one other one that's a better one. Why would the ocean surface temperatures become cooled just on the equator in October? This one's right here happening on the left. And then colder in the summer along the whole northern hemisphere, as seen in this one right here, if the sun was responsible for the temperature change. They can't answer this. This is why weather has not been understood. So if you look up here on the right, you see this is right along the equator. Why is that area cold and this area hot? Well, it happens because down here is the same thing that happens under the ocean. This is the ocean water down here, and this is up on the land, continents. In both places, there's earthquakes. And that earthquakes causes friction, heats the water, and we have a whole new, this hydrotherm I just talked about, we have a whole nother heat source. We have two heat sources. So what I want to show you is this. So by the way, these maps are from, this one we adapted to the UN, but we got these from government science organizations. This one's out of a journal article. And what they're showing you here is cooled water that's sinking, and this is hot water, which are plumes that are coming up in the ocean. And they've measured these. Okay? So they do know they're happening, and they don't fully recognize, though, that they're happening from earthquakes. We do have some information of isolated ones that some scientists found over here, but the other scientists haven't made the connection to it. So once again, it's not something that they all understand. The universal model is very unique because what we've done is gone in and studied all the sciences. All of them are interconnected. And this is critical in understanding connections like this with the hot, heated water underneath the ocean coming up and creating this high-pressure system. So there's another factor involved with this hurricane. This was the largest hurricane, most powerful one we've heard of. Well, guess what else has happened? How many of you know about another earthquake that happened the same time period in Mexico? We're going to talk about earthquakes real quick here because hurricanes, lava flows, and piezoelectricity are all involved with earthquakes. It was right here in Mexico. An 8.1 just happened 4 days ago. And this is a quote out of a news article I got. It's the strongest earthquake in a century in Mexico, right off the coast there. So this is important, but what's really important is what did people see right before this earthquake happened? And scientists have, some of them said, well, this last couple years, they're just starting to see people have phones now, so they're taking pictures of this all over. But the decades previously, they thought people were seeing this or imagining it. They didn't believe it. The bottom line is because they don't have a mechanism for it. What they were seeing was this. See right there? That's an earthquake light. They looked over there in the sky, and all of a sudden, it's all lighting up. Well, what's that earthquake light come from? There's another brighter one. You can go on YouTube. That's where I went and just grabbed these images. They're on there. And a lot of people took pictures of these. Well, it turns out this article is actually showing the earthquake over here and then showing these lights. There is a connection. And like I said, the scientists aren't understanding this, but we really should. And this is one of the reasons. Most researchers have not acknowledged the connection between earthquakes and the lights because the piezoelectricity coming from the movement of the rocks would challenge the current accepted energy field theory of the Earth. In other words, right now our energy field is a magnetic field, and it comes from magma. But as the universal model has demonstrated, there is no magma, so this magnetic field also could not exist from magma. And the has this in the weather model. We give a whole complete explanation with the evidences showing where our energy field comes from. But the reason this is so important to realize the earthquake lights are real, because look what can happen. People's lives can be saved. This happened just a couple days ago. That was an image from down there. So there's 3 new laws of weather in the weather chapter. Each volume has a number of new laws, and these are just a couple that help explain these things I just talked about. So let's move on. I will mention this, the geofield evidence is important because that third law, we mentioned geofield, that instead of a magnetic field, we call it a geofield. That's in the third law right there. And the geofield evidence in that chapter, which is the weather model, we go in there and explain. This is from a researcher again, the connection between the large earthquakes and electromagnetic phenomena in the ground and in the ionosphere is becoming increasingly solid. So researchers are finding these connections, but nobody's just put it all together. And that's what we do in the universal model, is put these things together so it finally makes sense. Some of you might have seen that. This is all having to do with earthquakes again. That's a paperclip. Why is it floating on water? It's made out of metal. Isn't metal heavier than water? That's water tension. Okay? That's tension that's holding on the top of the water. You could put a piece of paper on the water too and it will float. Well, the reason this is important is because this little area right here at the top, it's hard to see with my little laser here, but there is, right on the top of each of those, that little bumps, those are mountains. Okay, that's the crust of the earth. And all the blue area there you're seeing there is water. Now, once again, what's interesting about this is that these images are from a journal article. Scientists are actually saying this. The blue we put in there so you could see that it's water a little better, but the actual diagram is from them. And what happens is the water flows up these fault lines and came up, and that's where we get the hydrofountains, which Russ explained a little bit earlier. And he talked about Enceladus. This is another image of that moon, and this is where the water came shooting out. This is from the friction and going on. This is kind of a picture that we made to help you see. We actually have the one real photograph. There's real right here on the left. That was taken by the Cassini spacecraft. That's a real hydro fountain. That's almost 3 times as large as the 300-mile diameter of the moon. And that's what it would look like when we had these happening on the Earth during the universal flood. And as you can see here, this is another diagram helping you understand these. Now, why are these all important? Because some of these fountains coming up, they brought sediment with them. And when they brought sediment up the pipe and it was heated, and it's under pressure, it turns into rock. That's one thing we do in Volume 1 is we make rocks. So we show how these pipes were turned into rock. The soft sediment around them gets eroded away at the very end of the flood and leaves these pillars that you can find all around the world if you know where to go look. These are actually here in Utah. That's where I'm at right now. There's some in Arizona too. Well, they're connected to these. These are geodes, or these particular ones are called thunder eggs. Geodes are real important because you only find these on the surface of the earth. You don't go down in the Grand Canyon and find geodes. Well, why not? Where do they come from? Amazingly, I go and study this, and there is only one researcher we found who spent a little bit of his time studying geodes, and because he couldn't find the answers how they're made, he lost interest. So these kind of things are important because they're all connected back to the universal flood. This is quartz or agate based right here in the center of a dinosaur bone. This is another one. This is a calcite based one that has a bone. These materials are the same things that are in geodes. It's called chalcedony, which is a quartz based material. And those are fossils that I just showed you there. And this is an important quote. Up to 95% of the Earth's marine species disappeared at the end of the Permian period. Some 70% of land species, so this is the scientists that are acknowledging this already, including plants, insects, and vertebrates, also perished. It's arguably the single most important event in biology. But there's no consensus as to what happened. It's because they don't believe in the universal flood. They can't. This volume 2 goes into detail and explains why. There is an agenda that hinders the scientists from being able to understand how this all happened. And it becomes back to not allowing the universal flood to happen. And this is all explained in volume 2. So another fossil, which is real important, is petrified wood. I was there a couple months ago and took these images. And as you can see, it's beautiful. This is the petrified forest in Arizona. If you ever have a chance, you want to go there. I would read the book first, volume 1 and volume 2, and you'll see how this is actually made. And then it's just going to blow you away when you go and see this and realize there was 5 miles of water above you where those people are standing, that tree got turned into a rock. See, trees today aren't turned into rocks, are they? No, when it gets buried in the ground and it dies, it decomposes. There's no fossil in process today anywhere. It all formed in the flood. That particular slide is real important because this has some of the very first images we ever took of experiments. This is the very first geode that we made right down here inside our reactor. So you can see up over here, this is our oven. We took off the insulation from it around it, but inside is what we call an autoclave. That's a pipe that we put these various pieces of quartz down there, and you can see that piece of quartz right there. We doubled the size of it in one day. Okay, once we learned how to grow quartz and double its size in one day, what we did is we put inside it, that's a piece of apple tree right there from my backyard, and we put that in, and it took us 3 years and 75 runs to figure out how to turn the apple tree into petrified wood. So this is the first time this experiment was ever been successful. It was done back in 2005, and we're now letting it out and kind of explaining how we did it. So that's a really fun thing to see in that chapter. That's the fossil model. The first chapter of the UM is actually called the age model, and there you'll understand for the very first time why radiometric dating, which is of rocks, and why radiocarbon dating, which is of living things, why they're not correct. We went back to the original journal articles in the 50s and 60s and 70s that scientists used to start dating everything and found out there was a lot of inconsistencies and downright deception that took place. So that's all explained for the very first time in that chapter. It's fascinating to realize. And then we show real dating methods of how the age of the earth really is. And this is important because when we get to the world history model, we actually can explain how old the earth is. So we have a whole chapter on the evolution pseudo-theory, and one of the fascinating things in this chapter is that we have fossils like this which go directly against what Darwin thought. Back in his time, he thought that no organism wholly soft can be preserved. Because think about it. What happens to a jellyfish or a feather left outside and it gets wet and so forth? I mean, it doesn't, matter of fact, they find these are very similar to tracks. This is what you're looking there, and there's actually quite a few places, if you know what you're looking for, that is sand that's been turned to sandstone, the reddish area in the background there where the jellyfish is. You've been to a seashore before or a lake and you see sand there. What's going to cause that to turn into stone? Think about it. The next wave come in changes it. Those are ripples from the waves. What would cause it to turn into a rock? Well, Volume 1 explains with experiment for the very first time how sandstone is made. We make the first man-made sandstone. It's fascinating that we do it in the same way we made the petrified wood and the same way we make other rocks. You just have to understand that's a rock now. The sand turned into a rock, and we can do it in one day. You just have to know the recipe to do it. So this is real important because Darwin thought that, well, really soft things and those kind of things, it takes millions of years for these things to evolve, so there's no way that soft things can ever be preserved. But just the opposite is what we found. Can you recognize what kind of creature is fossilized in this stone? Why shouldn't we be able to recognize these shrimp if they really are hundreds of millions of years old? Why do they look like shrimp we find today in the ocean? Very important questions. They're not hard questions. Okay, this is supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old. these fossils all look just like the wasps that you find today. So this is a scientist telling you. They find fossils today. Some of them, they say 300 million years ago in amber, that are exact same bee that you'll find today. No difference. Well, if a bee didn't change over 300 million years, how did we change in just 500,000 years? They think we came from an ape in 500,000 years. Yeah, literally. And of course, there's no physical evidence for that. And we'll talk about that real quick here. Why is the canine the most diverse species in the world? This is where all dogs and the wolf came from. Because dogs have been bred by their owners for thousands of years, but no one has ever observed a dog turn into a new species. Think about that. Millions of people have had millions of dogs, and they've bred them so they're really small, and they've bred them so they're really big, but they're still a dog. Nobody's ever found a new species coming from another species before. We asked that question. Why are researchers unable to observe the formation of new species in either the laboratory or the wild? Why? Because there is no laboratory or experimental evidence of speciation. It doesn't exist. This was actually the very first chapter that we did the research for and I wrote. And I was open-minded. When I went to do this research, I said, you know, first thing you read is all these scientists, and they are so confident that evolution is a fact. When you read in the book, you're going to read quotes that I've never read anywhere else. I mean, in a book, okay? We had to search and search and search to find these quotes. I do have a couple of them in here. This is from Henry Gee, for example. He's an evolutionist, but he wrote a book thinking that he could explain how the way they thought evolution worked. Well, it didn't. So look what he said. The human family of species are arranged in an orderly procession from primitive forms up to the modern man. But such scenarios are subjective. They are unscientific. He knew there was no missing links in between, that it wasn't real. And he was trying to make a name for himself, so when he wrote this book, these are some quotes that we got out of it. But he's a big-time evolutionist. Nature. He was the editor of Nature, which is a European science journal, a big one over there. Why are children taught that they came from an ape-like creature when there is no physical evidence showing this ever occurred? Notice how none of these animals in the image are from any other animals. They're not connected. They all come from this question mark. This was one of the saddest things. This is what caused me, when I saw these things and took these pictures, I didn't know I was going to write a book at the time. This is way back in the late 80s, early 90s. I didn't even know this was going to happen. But I knew evolution had problems. And I see children go up and be told by their parents, or they read something saying, oh yeah, matter of fact, I don't have time, I guess, to go into, but okay. So I'll mention this one. We have museums that have mannequins, those ape-like creatures that I showed you a couple slides earlier. Where do you think those came from? Well, I saw those, and then they put skeletons next to them saying, oh, this fossil used to look like that. Well, I did a little digging. You guess where I found out these actually came from? Can't remember the year now, 1970s movie. It's all in the book. It'll be in the 3rd volume where we explain this. Guess who is the maker of the movie? Playboy. They made these mannequins for a Playboy movie, and the California Museum of Natural History in San Diego didn't tell anyone about it, and they just put it in their museum. And everybody came in there thought that, oh, these are really what those bones looked like. And I went in and talked to the curator, and I said, wait a second, how can you have this here? The bones don't tell us what color the skin was of the ape-like creature. They don't tell us the hair, how much hair they had. It was completely bogus. And she looked at me and goes, well, yeah, kinda. I said, kinda. I said, those are not a correct representation, and you're fooling everybody. You know, you're deceiving everybody. He says, okay, I'll have to take that into consideration. Anyway, so I have later pictures where they actually redid the museum, and they now have a nice big plaque there saying that they got this from the Playboy movie, and they're not correct, but we're still using them. So I was very grateful that they did that, and I got a picture of it, and you'll see that in Volume 3. I haven't told anybody that story except for right now. So evolution, here's 4 simple reasons why it's not real. There's no time, there's no evolution. No speciation, there's no evolution. Oh, by the way, there's no time because we have the age model. And we show in the age model, we demonstrate there that there's no millions or billions of years. There's never been any physical evidence for that, and this will be the first time in a book that you'll see it. There's no speciation, we just talked about that. No fossils in process, we just talked about that. And no evolution tree. Did I talk about that a little bit? I'll show another one here, another diagram a little bit later. So this is the Colin Patterson guy. Amazing story. When you go to read this in the book, you'll just be amazed. Here's a guy, hardcore evidence. Look what he said. And then I woke up. He was sleeping one night and he had a dream. And he said, I woke up and I realized that all my life I have been it's an older guy. So this was like 30, 40 years he'd been teaching evolution as a fact. I realized all my life I had been duped into taking evolutionism as revealed truth in some way. And he actually gives a presentation like I'm doing right now, and there happened to be a creationist in there on the front row with a tape recorder, tape recording it. Because the things that he wrote, evolutionists would deny. There's no way you're going to have big-time evolutionists say these type of things. But look what else he said. Can you tell me anything you know about evolution, any one thing that you think is true? The only answer I got was silence. And he went to various universities and different departments and asked the whole group of people, what can you tell me that we know is true about evolution? Got silence. So these type of things you don't read. They don't tell you about them. And that's why we have them in this chapter, to help you understand how much of a pseudo-theory, a false theory taught us fact evolution is. This is the kind of thing Darwin actually did, and you won't find this commonly written in any science textbook except for ours. After 100 generations of growing in a poor sandy soil, cauliflower and red cabbage would revert to the same form. See, if something's going to evolve up, well, what's going to stop it from evolving back? Darwin thought both happened. Neither happens. Now, Ernest Mayr was one of the big-time evolutionists. If any of you guys know Richard Dawkins, he was the Richard Dawkins of 20, 30 years ago. Look what he said. Laws give way to concepts in Darwinism. These biological concepts and the theories based on them cannot be reduced to the laws and theories of the physical sciences. Yes, biologists are telling us, and this is like their top guy, okay, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And look what he's saying. That's him. Evolutionary biology, in contrast with physics and chemistry, is a historical science. The evolutionist attempts to explain events and processes that have been already taken place. Therefore, laws and experiments are inappropriate techniques for the explication of such events and processes. You see, you don't need experiments. You don't need laws.
Just a quick question, then why does he and that other guy still claim to be evolutionists? On what basis do they maintain?
Oh, wow. You have to read the agenda, which is a subchapter in Volume 2. I didn't want to go into it in here, but there's a specific reason, okay? Well, we have quotes from the scientists themselves. They're not my quotes. They're ones that the scientists themselves have said that their science is their religion. So that's why they believe it. That's what they've said. So you have to read their when you've thought one way your whole life and now someone brings you physical evidence, shows you otherwise, and you've been in your career for a long time, it's next to impossible to be changed. It's very, very, very difficult. This is why the new ideas come from the young bucks. I started this when I was 28 years old. And I was pretty young then, not so young anymore. But we can imagine what is false, but we can only understand what is true. We get this from Newton, see? The evolution pseudo-theory is a science's most influential false philosophy. This is important because it's crept in and the entire scientific community, all the fields have been influenced by evolution. And it's completely false. In this chapter, you cannot read this chapter and have an open mind. In my eyes, or anybody that I've talked to that's read it and said, wow, evolution, they never had one piece of evidence. I mean, we go over dozens and dozens of examples showing that there is no evidence for evolution. By denying the very reason for its existence, to find truth and order in nature through natural laws, modern science has laid the foundation for a scientific revolution with theories like evolution. This is why we believe there will eventually be a revolution and a change in modern science. This is why the UM is a new millennial science. Because once you read what's in there, it's very clear what's happened. And it's never been put together before like the UM does, and that's why it's exciting to be doing this. And this is what scientists have told us. The textbook view could be wrong. Well, it's very, very wrong in all these fields. And this was the disappointing thing, is when I went in and started studying this field and this field, and several of theories like the theory of evolution and the theory of relativity, they permeated all the sciences. And both those theories are incorrect. There's never been any evidence for either one of those theories. And that's why all the science has incorrect theories also. They're all based on it. It's their foundation. Here's the other diagram I was telling you. The tree of life. This is supposed to be a tree of life. Phylogenetic. I don't even want to go into what that is, except it's theory. Because on the outside, you can't see. These words are too small. But those are all species. Okay, all around the world. And the problem is, every one of them goes down here to a line, but every single one of these down here doesn't have a name on it. There's no two animals that they say, oh, these two animals came from this animal. Now, in the 1980s, they thought for sure that they were going to show that, because they couldn't find any in the fossils. Okay, the fossils weren't working. They were the missing links, they weren't there. So they finally got excited. Why? DNA. In 1984, we have a book that was written by I think it's the National Science Foundation, or NAS, National Academy of Science. One of them has a book on evolution, and in there they are so excited because they now say DNA proves evolution. Unequivocally. The words they use, you could not be any more determined. And it turns out when you read that, you find out everything they said there, they had to eat crow. They counted their chickens before they hatched, because the DNA actually disproves evolution. And it's all in the chapter. There's never been two things. There's never been two species that have been shown to come from another species. If the DNA from these two animals came from this one, well, they can match. This guy right here, okay, if I go get his mom and dad, and I check his DNA, guess what? None of you in here are going to have as close as those three people. His mom and dad and his. None of you. None of you. That's the way DNA works. It's so precise. That's why they can convict in a court of law somebody for as heinous crime as they can be, because they can show no one else has that DNA. It's like your fingerprint. It's individualistic. And so they should be able to find from these two species that it came from this other species. But it has never worked. And it's all documented in Volume 2. This is just an amazing thing in the living model. After we show evolution as a false theory, then we show new laws of life in the living model. But one of the important aspects of the UM is we find these golden threads. There's things like salt, water, and now you're going to hear about microbes. If you read Volume 1, you realize that microbes are critical in understanding the formation of minerals. All the colors that you see in most of the rocks come from the microbes, okay? Especially when they were rocks made in the flood, which is the vast majority of the rocks you find out here in the sediment They all came from the flood, and microbes were involved. Well, this is how little that modern science has known about it. It was only, I can't remember the last year, it may be up to 15, 20 years now, but it's only been rather recently that they're making this statement. It's hard to believe that we've overlooked something so important for so long. How long have they had microscopes for? The most plentiful species on the earth. I don't even want to say it, because I know I'll mispronounce it, but that species is the one that's the most plentiful, and they just found it, time-wise, just recently. Over 20,000 of them in one drop. Here's another one. Scientists estimate that the planet has that many microorganisms, that's 10 to the 30th with 30 zeros after it. That's more than 100 million times the number of stars in the observed universe. Now, why is this important to you and I? Look down here in the bottom. We're really a composite of species. We have human cells, but there are 10 times more microbial cells in the human body. This is by weight, and they still don't know the exact number on this, but they just found out about this back in 2006. They thought there was one microbe in our stomach. Now they have tens of thousands of different species and trillions of cells of microbes. Without the microbes, and this is going to come up in the very end of the living model, and the human model is what I'm writing right now. And we've made several new discoveries in medical science in the human model, and one of them is understanding how important microbes are to the body. Without microbes, you don't exist. Here's a simple question. When you eat a carrot, how does that carrot, has anyone ever told you in school how a carrot turns into your eyeball or your nose or that fingernail? It goes in your stomach, there's hydrochloric acid there, it just kind of gets dissolved. It goes down in your intestines. Those are muscles. How does a muscle turn a carrot into another part of your body? Nobody's ever explained this. Now they know now on the inside of the intestinal tract, okay, there's all these microbes, but they've never known what they're there for, what they do, and they're so important. You would not exist without them. It's actually the fourth law of life, having this. Matter of fact, here's a couple of the laws here. The law of species. Each species remains the same species within its sphere of life. Dogs are dogs, people are people, and orchids are orchids. They've never changed. Same thing with a pigeon. If you breed any pigeon, that these have all been, interbred, interbred, and interbred. And if you interbreed any of those back with the original pigeon, guess what? They all go back to that stock pigeon. Because it's just like the wolf. You take any dog and breed it with a wolf, it's all going to go back to the wolf, the original. Because there is no evolving. Plants, animals, and humans did not hitchhike to Earth through the airless, frigid reaches of space on board a meteorite that would have vaporized on arrival. Without evolution and without the transport aboard meteorites, we are left with only one option. Life had to be placed on Earth by a higher intelligence. So we have a section in the living model where scientists talk about this higher intelligence. They actually are searching for it. And so this is very important to anybody that believes in higher intelligence, and we go into great detail. So we also have a chapter on the world history. And the world history is real important because the true science requires historical data to test and evaluate observations. If you like world history, if you believe in world history, you're going to love the world history model. There's a ton of records. Each one of these are subchapters, and each one of them is a record that demonstrates the world history is true. And I'm just going to talk about this one. Russ already talked a little bit about the universal flood record. We actually talk about it in here. There's some more pictures he already talked about. Three evidences. These three evidences all show the very season. Russ, where are you? Oh, you didn't mention this. The very season that the flood took place. We mentioned it took place 4,362 years ago, but we actually know the season. Now, just let you know right now, it was springtime. What time of the year do fish eggs and frog eggs every year come about? One time of the year, spring. What time of the year do we see pine cones come out? Spring. Out of all the fossilized pine cones, and I've seen thousands of them, I've never seen one like this one over here, opened up. It's because it was the beginning of the springtime and they've all been fossilized. If there was some that were come off the tree previously, these float. So these have to be buried and have to be in the hyperperm to turn into a rock. So this is another evidence of the time of year, which is springtime. And Russ already talked about the eggs of dinosaurs, the same thing. Reptiles also have their eggs. So we actually know the time of the year, the season that the flood happened. And it just so happens that it agrees with what world history says. Because we know the very day in world history it's recorded that it happens. But you have to read our book to understand that, because in the Bible, when it talks about it, it's actually a lunar calendar, and you have to convert it to our calendar to get that correct dating, and that's all in volume 2. So these are a couple more records in the world history model. I'm just going to talk about the language record real quick here. The Tower of Babel, what does the written record tell us? In no other time in history anywhere on the earth do we find large groups of people separating and starting a completely new language. So we never found anybody that's explained where the world's languages come from. There's all these theories, but you're going to read now for the very first time in a very simple, easily demonstrated way. Each of the original hieroglyphic written languages, there's 3 of them, came from the Mesopotamia Tower of Babel area and originated at the same time. The same time. And the scientists have documented this, but they never put it all together like we do in the UN. New cultures developed along with these languages as they spread throughout the world. So what you find is the cuneiform language, and that is where the English language and every other European language came from. Okay, that's a real quick little diagram of that. And what you can see is all these basically European languages, they all came from this same language, but it was a pictograph. I'll explain real quick why that happened here in a second. The Egyptian was the next language. Okay, these are hieroglyphics also, pictographs, meaning they actually made little pictures. Each word was a picture. And I'm going to show you the third one here. Everyone's seen Egyptian stuff written down and everything. They don't use this language anymore today. They don't use the cuneiform anymore later today. But this one they do. Chinese, matter of fact, it's the most abundant language used in the world. 1.3 billion Chinese, I think it is. Turns out I spent a couple years in Japan, and Japanese use the same language also. They add hiragana and katakana, some other letters to it. But the language that they use over there, if you go to Japan right now and somebody asks you a question, like if I say red, am I talking book or a color? You don't know. So what the Japanese do is they write red on here. They do a tree, they put a line, and they go ding, 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 ding. That's the symbol for a tree. That means ki, or in Japanese, a tree. And it turns out that's how all these Asian cultures use. They would write on their hand. Why is that important? Because look what Chinese, those languages mean. The boat, this one over here, means a vessel of 8 people or mouse. Does anybody know how many people were on that boat down there? That's right. These are evidences all back for the flood. It turns out that everybody in the world came from Noah's 3 sons and daughters. The sons all came from the same mom and dad, but the 3 daughters, one of them created the African nation, the other one the European, and the other the Asian. And we all talk about this. And this is in the world history. We have lots and lots of examples of that. The last chapter in the living system is the Clovis model. This is a fascinating chapter on archaeology. We mostly focus on American archaeology, but we touch a little about the whole world, and we explain why the archaeology in America has never been able to explain all the artifacts and the dating scheme. It just doesn't work. And it's because of these 3 pseudo-theories that they've had. You can see all 3 there? Okay. Well, what's so amazing is archaeologists have completely missed this fact, and that is there's more artifacts per acre back east, eastern United States, than anywhere else in the world. I've studied artifacts from all over the world, and there's literally millions of them still preserved right now in the basements of people's homes. You see that picture up there in these books? That's a basement. And people line their walls with displays. I have some over here on my thing, just one little display. But people have their whole house full of artifacts. And they're all different kinds of artifacts from the fields their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, when they came over, and every time they went to farm back east in Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Mississippi, New York, artifacts. And this is really important for certain people that understand the history of the people that lived back there. But there was somebody else that lived back there that was older than all the rest. And this is the Clovis mystery. You can tell how old a projectile point is or where it came from by its shape and size. This is real important. Once you start studying artifacts, you see these kind of artifacts. Okay, these are from, I think, Madagascar. Yeah, off the coast of Africa. But they're very common all around the world. These are only about an inch long. And the small ones like this are easy to make. Go ahead and try to make your own arrowhead. Go get a rock, and you have to use a horn, an antler from a deer or an elk, and you try to go ahead and chip that rock and turn it into an arrowhead. It's not easy. I've done it, okay? So little ones are much easier to make than the long ones. So since modern archaeology is based on evolution, how should the shape of the points progress through time? In general, the larger, the finely made points are the newest, right? Isn't that the way everything evolves? When you have an automobile, isn't the newest ones the most advanced? Wait a minute. It didn't say newest at the end there. Why does it say oldest? Well, it's because this is a diagram. Once again, not one from me, it's from a government institution. And they're showing you here is the time, this is the time frame going up and down. And notice on the bottom is your Clovis down here. See that right there? These type of points are the largest ones. They're made out of the special lithic material, chert, the most colorful colors. And they have a very, very special thing. You can't see very here, but it's called a flute. It's this big, long chip that goes up and down. Let's see if I have. Well, you can see this one here a little bit down here in the bottom has one. I'll show you a better one better. But these have a technology that they only discovered, when I say they, it was an amateur archaeologist in the 1960s, how to make this artifact. They didn't know before the 1960s. No archaeologist had ever discovered it. And why are these so important? What are those things next to them? You know what those are? Anybody know? Fossils of what? That's a tooth, and that's a tusk, a mastodon. Horses were the most abundant animal found, killed by the Clovis people to eat, but they also killed mastodon and ate them. And it turns out that here's a picture, and the reason they're called Clovis is because it was Clovis, New Mexico, where they found the first one, and they found these embedded in a fossil. So we're talking a rock fossil and human points. When I say a point, that means an artifact or an arrowhead point or a spear point. Here's an association of two things. Now wait a minute, a fossil, if you talk to the paleontologist, takes millions of years to make. But the scientists know that they put a number on that Clovis point here as being 10,000 years old. These guys right here, they say are 10,000 years old. But in the chapter, we demonstrate that that number is completely bogus. They're less than that, okay? But the fact of the matter is that where would we expect to find the newest and the oldest vehicles in a junkyard when they've been varied over time? Researchers have been unable to explain why the most advanced Clovis points are found on the bottom, and the crudest and latest points were found on the top of archaeological sites. It makes no sense. It's reversed. And this was my very first discovery. I get pretty excited about it. It was back in 1990 and 93 when I discovered this, and it changed my whole life. This is once again, the researchers saying this. It's almost as if the technology appeared from nowhere. Remember, they're on the bottom. There's nothing below them. How does that happen? How does something just come out of nowhere? And it's the most advanced rock tool that's ever been made. Despite more than 200 years of archaeological research, we still do not have a tight chronological framework for the initial arrival and movement of people across the Western Hemisphere. They can't explain it because they thought they came across the Bering Strait, but now we show research unequivocal that didn't happen. Indisputable pre-Clovis artifacts. After more than a century of research, we must begin to question whether they actually exist. There aren't any artifacts before Clovis. So now we're going to the first world model. We actually have scientific evidence demonstrating that man did not come from Africa from an ape, but he came from North America from these Clovis people. And here, my friends, is where man originated. I'll let you figure out if you, some of you might know about that, because this is not my map. Okay, this is an archaeological organization showing you where the Clovis points are from. And it's very, very telling where the first man came from. There is no other artifact as old as the Clovis point because it's associated with rocks. Fossils turned into rocks. They weren't made over millions of years. It all makes sense when you understand you can make that rock in days when you know the right recipe. Those rocks were made in the flood. These were pre-flood people. They're called Adamites. They were the Adam culture. The theory that modern man first appeared in the Americas is quite a new theory, a turnabout in archaeological thinking. This is one of the very few archaeologists that came out and said this. He was like on the fringe. But this is where the most highly concentrated area of Clovis points are found in the world. This advanced fluting technology was the first of its kind and required both a powerful and skilled technician. You had to be a really strong guy. There's that flute I was telling you about. See going up and down there? You can see it right up over here and right here, even all along this little one right there. The way they make that flute, you have to read the book, but it's fascinating how they do this. When they go to make that last flute, usually when they go to hit the artifact, it can destroy it all unless you are extremely skilled and know how to do it. All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them. I hope you've enjoyed our presentation tonight. It's really difficult for me to take hundreds and hundreds of new concepts and ideas that are in each one of these volumes and give you just maybe a dozen tonight, but that's what we've done. And I just want you to know that this is an exciting time for us, and someday you're going to look back on this time you were here when the living model is revealed. This is actually the first meeting. Thank you so much for coming.